Hello and welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for being here. From Rice Eccles in Salt Lake City, I am Matt Smith. Oh, before I get rolling, like and subscribe. You know the drill. Helps me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it. You know, with every L that stacks up, those views keep going down. So thanks for my real ones for still being here and hype me up in the comments. 53-7, Utah beat the shit out of Colorado. I don't know what else to say to you because that's what happened tonight, okay? I mean, that was as bad of a loss as I've covered in my time at CU. You know, 2022, 2011, 2012, that's right up there with the worst of them. Oregon beat the snot out of CU at home, like 70-6, I think it was, back in 2012, which is the only worst first half, at least in my time covering the program, than what we saw tonight. This was worse than Oregon's first half. That was 35-0. That Washington State game where they sacked Shedeur 4 times in the first 10 snaps, you know, that was, I think it was 42-7, I want to say, at halftime. This one, you know, 43-zip. You know, taking timeouts to get a field goal at the end of the first half. I don't know what to say. I mean, coming off a bye, they just got the wheels, you know, beat off them today. And it was embarrassing. It was pathetic. It was unacceptable, inexcusable. All of those adjectives and those words that you want to use to describe today, that's what it was. It was just pure incompetence. And with a bye week and 2 weeks to prepare for Utah, I thought they would have a better effort, certainly, than what we saw tonight. I mean, tonight was despicable in every way. They looked like they didn't belong on the field with Utah, and that's a tough pill to swallow for Coach Prime, who, after the game, said that was the worst beating he's ever taken in his life, short of the ones that his mom used to give him. He said that was one-on-one, him and Kyle Whittingham, and he worked them all over the field, which in many ways is true. There was one team that was well coached, well prepared, that was invested, bought in tonight, and it wasn't Colorado. To such a large degree that, and it's still windy here, so that's what we're, at least let's just hope it doesn't fall. But to such a large degree that it was jarring. I mean, basically this game was over. Second play into it, 63-yard scramble by Utah's backup quarterback, and their backup quarterback beat you by over 40 points tonight. I was just listening to Kyle Whittingham in his post-game presser, and he said that Devin Dampier tried to give it a go, and if he would have felt good enough in pregame, it would have been Dampier, but it wouldn't have mattered. They would have still beat the crap out of Colorado, and this is one of those that you don't have a lot of words. I mean, you allow 420 rushing yards, I believe it is. Is that how much did they finish with? Rushes, net. Yeah, 422. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, that's beyond words, really. I mean, you give up, I think at the end of the first half, it was 396 yards for Utah, negative 19 for Colorado. They just got throttled, guys. I mean, absolutely throttled. And I know a lot of you are quarterback, Salter. Yeah, he didn't play great tonight, but I thought this was by far the worst game from the offensive line all year. I thought they'd overachieved as a group, quite frankly, up until this point. They were due for a bad one, and tonight it was really bad. I mean, credit Utah, and I asked Caden Salter about this after the game. I said, is that the most pressure that you've seen all year? Knowing that his answer would be yes, but I mean, he elaborated quite a bit. He said he watched 10 hours of film this week, and none of those looks that did they present. And I was listening to Coach Whittingham, and he said that they dialed up a lot of run blitzes, out of run looks. They tried to stack the box and make Colorado beat them with you know, through the air and with Caden Salter's arm. And, you know, I think that's a pretty good plan, because what Colorado's done pretty well this year is rush the football. And Utah has played a lot of running quarterbacks lately. That was something that Coach Whittingham was talking about coming into the week. And defensive coordinator Morgan Scalley for Utah, they put together one hell of a game plan and executed it. It was, as Salter said afterwards, it felt like every play there was one more guy than Colorado could account for. And whether that was delayed blitzes, whether it was different looks, disguising things, hat has to go off to Utah and the performance that they put together this year after getting absolutely embarrassed themselves in Folsom Field last year. They got their get back tonight. And it was pretty rich, quite frankly. You know, I'm sure Coach Whittingham was not too happy about the way they lost last year. And, you know, I know that was fresh on their mind, especially because coming off last week's BYU loss, they really needed to get things back on track, and they did tonight in a really big way, even without their starting quarterback, which just speaks to what kind of system and what kind of program they've established here. And afterwards, Coach Prime came in to the press conference, said he has just got so much respect for Kyle Whittingham, which who doesn't? I mean, he's been the grand poobah in the Pac-12, you know, for quite a while as far as like a model of stability and consistency. And I asked him, what's the difference between you and them? Like, where is the disconnect? What separates Colorado and Utah? And he said stability at some key positions and, you know, consistency. And, you know, he says it's a good question, because clearly Utah is the model of what Coach Prime is trying to build in Colorado. And year 3 into the program, because of the transient nature of the way they've had to build these teams, there isn't as much carryover. And outside of that first 2-year pocket, right, with Shedeur and Travis, now it's kind of like you get to build this fresh, you know. It gets to be your own scheme, and it gets to be built around the talent that you have, and that's all true. But there is still a missing element of consistency where year over year you're developing some of the guys in the back end of your roster. Like Utah will hit the portal, but they're not going to scavenge the portal and bring everybody in, right? This is a team that has established a true culture and identity as a program, and they played with it tonight. Mean as hell against the run the hell out of the football. I mean, you know, there was a moment there in the first half where it felt like the Khalil Tate game. You know, shout out Arizona, who's the opponent next week. Just chunk play after chunk play, and we saw that a little bit against Iowa State, where, you know, Iowa State on the ground really reeled off a bunch of big ones with their running backs. And tonight, this was our fear heading into it. You know, coming into this, I felt like it was probably going to be a 10-point game. I thought that compared to every other time I've been to Utah, this was the most hope that I had that it wouldn't go terribly wrong. And, you know, I've seen what happened tonight on this field 100 times. I've watched that Buffs game 100 different times, and I know fans have as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who felt like Colorado should be past this type of a performance at this point in Coach Prime's tenure, and you're probably not wrong. And if you're mad, you're frustrated, you're upset, I get it. Like, I get it. There is nothing that I'm going to say that's going to make you feel better. Some of you want changes to the coaching staff. Maybe that comes in the offseason. But at 3-5 right now, and sure, 1-4 in conference, Colorado still has some very, very important goals to play for this year. And I know it's going to be very hard for some of you to hear that based upon what they just did. And certainly if they come out and play like they just did, none of that stuff really matters. And I asked Coach Prime afterwards about, is this a game you just flush? You know, because to me, it kind of feels like that. Like he said, no, I want to come with the why and why did this happen? And yes, as a program, as a coaching staff, they need to figure out why this happened. Should they have given everybody a vacation? Should they have gone home over the break? They did beat Iowa State, kind of cloak and dagger, got a little bit lucky to do it, but it was a win. A win is a win, and this year we've talked about it. You don't apologize for any breaks that you get along the way, but as a result, coming back, we'd heard a little bit earlier on the coaches show this week with Mark Johnson that there were some guys that didn't make it back. And one thing Coach Prime has been incredibly consistent about is if you're not there by the Sundays that they get back from breaks, there's going to be consequences. And Omarion Miller and Joseph Williams did not show up on time from the bye week, which is flat out inexcusable. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that either one of them played. Omarion played in the second half. What did he finish with? 59 yards. I don't know. And Brian actually asked Coach Prime, like, what kind of a tone does that set for the rest of the guys when two important players, Brian used the words leader, and when two leaders on your team don't show up, and maybe leaders in performance alone, but not leaders in the way they carry themselves and what they do for the team. And Coach Prime was very quick to correct Brian. He said, don't use the L word, don't use leadership word. They may be, and Brian corrected himself and said leading receivers. I think that says a lot about how Coach Prime feels about some of the better players on this team and maybe about this team overall. It's clearly a team that significantly lacks for leadership. I mean, it's really bad. As far as like bona fide leaders, you can point to Tawfiq Byard and Jordan Seaton. I think Caden Salter's becoming more of that guy as the season goes along, but it's hard when you go out and you play like that tonight. As he said, he's 9 of 22, and he felt like most of his incompletions were throwaways. I mean, guys weren't open. He was trying to motor around. I actually thought, as far as like escaping pressure, he did a decent job of it tonight. How many sacks? I want to say like 5 sacks for Utah they got in there. Yeah, 5. I don't know. There's a couple where he's got to get away. And look, I'm not defending how he played tonight. He was not good, okay? I understand that. He just had almost nothing to work with. And it felt like one of those Shedeur games where it's like, what the hell do you want the guy to do? I mean, he's literally running for his life. So I understand frustration. I understand calls for Juju. It would have been insane to put him in the game tonight. Ryan Staub came in to replace Caden after this thing was far out of reach. And look, there is, like I said, still so much to play for. Getting to back-to-back bowls makes a huge, huge difference for this program because it shows some proof of concept. So still, you're not on Utah's level yet, but who among us truly expected them to be at this stage in the program, having to replace as many guys as they did last year? That was a foolish expectation. Should they have been able to compete with them? Yes, they definitely should have. And I asked Caden Salter and Jeremiah Brown afterwards if they were as blindsided as Coach Prime was, who said that after such a physical week in practice, he could have never predicted that this was the way that they would come out and perform tonight, but it is. And, maybe that's not having your finger on the pulse. I'm not exactly sure. It felt like from a game plan perspective, Coach Prime acknowledged how much they were getting blitzed, and even in the post-game presser, he said, I think they're still blitzing us. It felt like there was a lack of recognition and adjustment to some of that quick tempo game up until the second half when, it was just far too late at that stage. Not that I really think any coaching adjustments would have made significant differences tonight, but I do think you probably could have at least stopped the bleeding maybe a little bit more in the first half. And it just, it was brutal. I mean, who cares about the numbers? I'm throwing the numbers away. It was egregious across the board, and they know that. However, this is my opinion, and you can let me know what you think in the comments, but for the best way to maximize the rest of this season is to continue down the road that they have been on. And I know a lot of people are going to say, look at the way they got embarrassed. You're insane. You're out of your mind. 53-7. You can't. There have to be changes. Let me finish. As I asked Salter and Brown afterwards, you guys kind of just flushed this game, right? Just because you got your asses kicked tonight doesn't mean you really, have lost confidence in this group. And they were like, no, both of them. And okay, all right, it's, it's two younger guys in their 20s saying, no, of course not. But you need that as well. And I do think that there are 4 winnable games in November. Kansas State is looking better and better and better. And certainly on the road in Manhattan is going to be a tough one. But they've achieved 3 wins this year. A bowl game is absolutely still attainable. And I asked Coach Prime if he thinks about that after the game. And he's like, no, I'm thinking about this moment. And the reason I asked him about it is because I truly believe that the biggest mistake you could make in trying to correct what happened tonight is overreacting, because this team is who they are. Changing things and making grand shifts right now isn't going to yield the results that you hope for or think it could. And playing the way that they had played the few weeks prior, now certainly with cleaning some things up, is absolutely more than enough to get to that 6 if you can string together some wins. So as long as that's still on the table, I don't think that a lot of major changes as far as the 2025 season right now are concerned are going to take place. Now, let's address the Juju thing. I've got, my mentions are full. The texts I was getting during the game were crazy. Look, there's some things going behind the scenes, as far as I understand, that are preventing Juju from earning some of those opportunities. He's not ready yet, and he's showing that. And until he can correct some of that stuff, he's not going to get those opportunities that fans are clamoring for. So he came in with a lot of, big hype, but at the same time, he's got to hold up his end of the bargain. And I can't talk about what I've heard about, but I will just say, as far as I understand, he's not. So that's why he's not getting these opportunities. And there is also a redshirt year to preserve. And I think with who he is coming in at 17, using this year as the early enrollee, he should still be a first semester senior in high school, right? And having that as a bonus year. Whether or not the 5-year eligibility rule comes into place eventually, maybe it does. I did just see Brett Bielema, Illinois' head coach, before their game, I think it was at his weekly presser this week, talk about how he doesn't think that the 5-year rule is coming this year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. And Diego Pavia, obviously challenging for JUCO not to count against eligibility. We're opening up slowly cans of worms in this process of trying to regulate college football that I think will eventually lead us to a better resolution, eventually lead these schools to sitting down and collectively bargaining with athletes and trying to actually come up with a real solution instead of a hodgepodge thing where it's really just a power grab to maintain their leverage over student athletes and try to wrestle some of that back. They're gonna have to find a way to swallow the pill and bite the bullet and meet these kids where they are with fair representation covering them as well, because this is America after all, and it is a free market. So instead of changing the laws, let's saddle up, figure out what it's going to look like, and start putting those rules in place. Rant over. Back to the game. It was awful. But the point is I think moving forward, unless Colorado comes out with more of the same next week and gets embarrassed, which I don't think is going to happen. You get your ass kicked like this, it is a wake-up call. This isn't a splinter thing. Had they lost to Iowa State, taking the bye week, then came out and lost this game, then I think we'd say, okay. But because of that Iowa State game, as I talked about with Brian on the podcast this week, it did take some pressure off of having to win this game to maintain bowl eligibility. So I think when temperature settles down a little bit, I think there will be a little bit, okay, just look, Utah's over, figure out why we were so unprepared, be on them all week about being prepared, being focused, which of course I'm sure they were this week, but it's easy when you have this, carrot to kick them in the ass with. But understand that there really is a lot to play for, and making this a bigger deal than, in my opinion, it should be is not the way to go. And I truly hope that they don't take that path. Now, we'll see what plays out. They've got Arizona, then they've got a trip to West Virginia, a bye, Arizona State, and then a trip to Manhattan at the end of the year to round out the regular season. Making a bowl game for this team would be huge. So while the sky is going to be falling from a lot of people, and I heard it, all over social media, and certainly from plenty of people that I know sending me texts throughout the game, I know there's a lot of frustration right now. And this year has been frustrating in some ways, right? There were a lot of high expectations set from inside the program, and they've fallen short of those. And even some of the lower expectations set from people like myself outside of the program, they've fallen short of some of those. But the truth is they can find a way to get to 6. You're right in line with what I expected. And it was never going to be pretty this year, and it was never going to be perfect this year, but you got to find a way to get it done. Now, clearly, this effort, ain't going to get anything done. It's got to be way better, but I do believe that it will be. I do believe changes will eventually come, and asking Coach Prime the question that I did after the game about Kyle Whittingham and about Utah's program and what separates Colorado from Utah, and he's talking about stability at certain positions, and certainly there's other things in his mind, but the truth is they're not there yet. And if Coach Prime is going to stay at Colorado, I do believe a loss like this at the end of the year, and even behind the scenes as the year's winding down, gives you more direction of what it is that you need to get here, okay? The lack of physicality. Okay, they're physical in practice, but overall, there still is a lack of overall physicality. The offensive line's been doing well this season overall in pass protection, but outside of that, it really has been a significant lack of physicality. Secondary, they need some significant upgrades. Linebacker's a mess. That has to be completely redone next year. Receivers, got to figure out which dudes are dudes and which dudes are just guys, because they got to go find more dudes. And I think they have some talented guys here that are just guys. But are they dudes? I don't know. And I think a lot of that will be resolved moving forward. But as it stands right now, against Arizona, it's back to staying out of those third and longs that they dealt with a ton tonight because they just couldn't win on first and second down. It's back to finding a way to string together drives, running the football. I think in so many different ways, you just tear this one out of the book, throw it away, and move on to the next one with what you have. Understand that the level of focus and preparation was nowhere near where it should have been, and maybe that was from the top down, an example set that maybe we should have treated the bye week a little bit differently, considering who was coming out of it. But to be quite honest, I mean, I think they could have all stayed back and done a lot more hitting. Caden even said that at one point this week, quarterbacks were live, which I'm sure is probably not incredibly typical of a bye week. But at the same time, they could have done all those things, and I still think they were losing this football game. I think that's clear, but moving forward, what this can teach them is that, all right, well, yeah, we know we shouldn't have lost that badly, but there's other stuff that we've been showing this year and that we've proved to ourselves that we can do, that we can come out the end of the year with, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. And if they don't, we'll deal with and cross that bridge when they get there. But I think it's really important to stay locked in, because you find a way to knock off Arizona. West Virginia did give TCU a little bit of a run for their money. It was only 23-17, which is a little bit less than I expected, but coming off back-to-back wins, not a surprise that TCU maybe had a little of a letdown today. You find a way to win 2 of those games, and you just got to win one of Arizona State and Kansas State, and ASU's coming off a bye. I think Sam Leavitt came back to the game, but did get injured. They got beat by Houston, who's now 7-1. BYU won again today. They beat Iowa State. I told Brian they would. And then Cincinnati's rolling, but Georgia Tech won again. I mean, there's a couple of teams they've lost to that, are very good football teams. And look, and certainly pushing for the top 10, I imagine that BYU and Georgia Tech will probably be a top 5 team this week, and BYU will be a top 10 team this week. So there have been some impressive performances. Tonight, clearly just an overall unacceptable lack of focus that falls on the head coach, as he addressed, and he took it all, owned it all. He really did. He didn't mention a player in there. I can only imagine what the conversations were like on Well Off. I'm very intrigued to watch those. And I'm also very intrigued to see what the tenor and the mood is like of this team on Tuesday and moving forward this upcoming week into Arizona, because I think, again, dwelling on this, learn from this, and move on, because there is too much still left at stake to let this one hang around. Like, you cannot afford any hangover from a game like this. On Twitter, I said that instead of post-game recaps tonight, Adam, Brian, and I were going to learn as much choreography from the Thriller music video in honor of Halloween month, and then at least just film whatever we could figure out. This is all I've got. So to those of you who follow me on X, there's my little thriller for you. I appreciate everybody out there for tuning in, whether you found me on Mile High, whether you found me on socials, whether you've been following the whole time. As the wind is finally going to blow over my phone, I say goodbye from Salt Lake City, as I got to pack all this stuff up and race my behind to the airport, because I got an early flight. So again, like and subscribe, hype. If you've been a ride or die, I appreciate it as always, and I'll talk to you guys very soon.